Hello everybody. Hey, I'm a little bit early, but just got a few things to set up, and welcome to my first Facebook Live. So I'm trying to see if I can get it to come up on my computer just by my side. If so, then hopefully I'll be able to see some comments if they come through. Awesome, if I can. Amazing, there I am. Brilliant. Okay, great, so that means I'm going to be able to see, surrounded by pictures of myself, but I'll be able to hopefully see some comments. Oh great, Jacob Gilborn, David, yeah. Oh, fantastic. So, first off, hello, welcome. We'll give just a few minutes and I'm a little bit on the early side. But I wanted to do this to allow me the opportunity to say thank you. I had a little period recently where I was in hospital, which was not particularly nice, and this horrible virus has kind of affected lots of people, but I was one of the lucky ones in the fact that I got out of hospital. I was in for just under 3 weeks, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant experience to begin with, but I saw some really, really lovely acts of compassion and kindness from everybody, from the NHS, and then even fellow patients, you know, towards the end when you're not isolated and by yourself. And I got lots and lots of messages, so I'd like to thank everybody that sent me a message, or even just, you know, gave me some kind of a positive thought, because it really does make a difference, or it did for me anyway. It made a difference knowing that there were people out there sort of rooting for you. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, was thanks very much. That's really, really, it's really appreciated and won't be forgotten. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. And secondly, I just think it's good to share information. It's something that I've not been doing a great deal of teaching of late, and that's something that I do quite a lot of, generally speaking. And I miss it, you know, I really miss the experience of trying to decipher music for myself first and foremost, try and figure it out, and then share those things. And I enjoy the process of sharing information coming from lots of different directions, and it's a two-way thing. So I'm sure if anything that we touch upon today, like if you've got any ideas or any ways that we can expand or improve anything, then I'm all ears. I definitely would like to hear that, because, you know, we all learn from each other. I'd love to say that everything I'm going to say today is a completely original idea. Unlikely though. A lot of these things are just things you pick up from other players. Some of them you put your spin on it and so on. But so that's really just to set the stall. I'm thinking as well, just from the feedback that I've had so far, just in terms of like messages in the week, that this is going to become a regular thing, which would be quite cool. I need to think of a snappier name though than John Wheatcroft Q&A. So again, anyone got any ideas? I'll be all ears, definitely be all ears. So let's just dive in with some of the things that people have asked this week. I know I can see there, sorry if I look distracted, it's just I've got a computer to my left, and it's just nice to just look at some of the messages. But I've got a little list of some questions that have come in this week, and I'll try my best to work through them. I'll try and keep things succinct if possible. So if the question doesn't relate to your playing, or if it's at a level that's too advanced or not advanced enough, just please be patient. I'll hopefully get to something that will relate to everyone, if that's possible. I'll try and keep things as sort of as broad as I can, but it's inevitable in this situation that there's going to be some things where we're talking about stuff that really is not particularly of interest to you. I hope that we'll get to stuff, as I say. There'll be something in every one, I'm hoping. But keep the questions coming, and then the things that I can schedule for subsequent weeks. I mean, generally what tends to happen as well is people seem to have similar areas. I mean, we all have them, myself included. So the only reason why maybe I've got some some strategy in places because I've dealt with some of these problems personally. So anyway, the first question I got from Phil, which is really interesting, he's talking about minor 2-5-1s and just ideas of things you can do over minor 2-5-1s. So I just thought I'd run through a little checklist of 5 or 6 things that you can do in that situation. So 2-5-1 is where we take the scale or the harmony. In this case, we'll do it in the key of D, or D minor, of course, and we go to the second degree. This is an E minor with a flat 5, and then we go to the 5, which is some kind of an A7, fancy A7 if you like, and then we go back to a D minor. Again, in that case, a D minor with a 6 and a 9 are the 2. But essentially, it's some kind of E minor flat 5 type chord, and that could be with a natural second, and then some kind of A7 chord with, you know, raised or lowered 5th or 9. Generally speaking, you try and stay away from things with natural 6s, 13s, and so on, because as soon as I do this, you hear the next chord's going to be major. There are some exceptions to that, where you can kind of make something allude to major, so you think it's going to be major, and then you move it to minor, you know. So, okay, so let's deal with that. So in this key, it's E minor 7 flat 5 to some kind of A7 to a D minor of some description. And what type of D minor might depend upon the style. If it's Gypsy Jazz, it's probably going to be a D minor 6. If it's bebop or bossa nova, it might be a minor 9 with an 11 on it, or what have you. It's possible that you might have the root in the bass, or maybe a different note, like the 5 in this case, flat 5. So, okay, so the first thing I guess is to become really comfortable, flexible with the arpeggios. I played a minor 6 there, so that was an E minor 7 flat 5, an A7, and then a D minor 7. But I'd suggest that what you do is you get flexible enough with them that you can play them from any point. And so one of the ways to do this is to go through these different permutations. You see, Jerry Bergonzi talks about this a lot. So if we took, just for the sake of just to go into a different harmony for a moment, we take D major instead of D minor this time. Of course, we all know D major, I'm hoping. D major 7 is those 4 notes, root 3, 5, 7. Now, of course, we can play them 1, 3, 5, 7, and that's cool. But we can also play them 1, 3, 7, 5. It sounds more melodic that way, it sounds more like a melody. Or we could go 1, 5, 3, 7. Or we go 1, 5, 7, 3. Or we go 1, 7, 3, 5. 1, 7, 5, 3, and so on. Then we've got things that start from the 3. And then things that start from the 5. And then patterns that start from the 7. Now, there's 6 from each, and I'm not going to go through them all now. I'm sure you can figure out the different permutations of those numbers. But the point of this is to not go like on stage or whatever and think, okay, now I'm going to do 3, 1, 5, 7s or what have you. The idea is you get used to the concept of being able to transition from any arpeggio or whatever it might be to whatever the next thing is in harmony by going to the closest note, so that you don't always kind of come in through the front door, as it were, which is the root. Because most of the time you practice things that way, then you're going to play them in that way. And this is something we're going to touch upon in a little bit. It's a great question. Yeah, I've got 2 that are related. Jacob talking about improvisation and the sort of quality of improvisation, and then another one about practicing. And one of the things that I like to practice is to be as flexible as possible. If I find when I'm playing something that I always do things the same way, like you always come in this way, or always come in that way, I'm always looking for an alternative. There must be a different way, rather than always playing the root first or always playing the 3rd or what have you. But anyway, a really big connection in bebop language is to go from the 7th of this chord, okay, And then that drops down a semitone. And then we do something from there, usually connected to diminished, and then that resolves to our D minor. And the reason why we might do something with diminished is if we can see this A7 chord as being related to diminished. I'm wondering if anyone's noticed the guitar is the right way around, by the way. Usually these things get flipped, but for once it is meant to be this way around. But okay, because I'm left-handed. Okay, so we have E half diminished. Excuse me, sorry, with a flat minor, doubly flat minor third there. Sorry. Now, if I just flip this now by taking the flat 7, which is a D note, and I just drop it down a semitone, I get what looks like a diminished chord. And I guess it is a diminished chord, but it's actually an A7 with a flat 9. That's what we've got now. So we've got E half diminished, A7 flat 9, which is a really cool sound. And you hear this in Gypsy, those kind of runs in Django style all the time. So we can see this as being half diminished, full diminished minor, if you like. And what's happening there with these voices as well, these voicings are connected. So meaning if we look at this chord and this chord, they're the same intervals, you know, root 5, 7, 3, and that's root 5, 7, 3. And this can be repeated everywhere all over the guitar. You know? Anywhere where you can find these voicings, you know, where you find. Those kind of voicings. These are drop 2 voicings, which again, that might be another, this might be another topic for discussion. So I'm aware of the fact that any one of these things could lead into another kind of subject, as it were. But for now, 2, 5, 1. So maybe that's the first thing. We can see the arpeggios. Now maybe I might go. Make that diminished there. So what's happening here is the 7 of one chord links to the 3 of the next chord. That's a really big voice leading. And all these lines that you might hear. They all come from finding some way of getting to there. And you can go. It could be anything really, but you could play the arpeggio, and then this leads us to diminished, and there'll be a good 2-5-1 line. The problem with this is it sounds like an exercise if I go, because everything's going in the same direction. And then whatever you do on D minor, you know. Okay, now what we can do is to make this sound less like an arpeggio is we can move notes in different octaves. So just as a lick that you could learn, here's the original idea, root 3, 5, 7, and then we go to like the diminished arpeggio, which is really the 3, the 5, the 7 and the flat 9 of our A7. And then it resolves. So I'm going to flip the octaves, the same numbers though. So root 3, flat 5, 7, 3, 5, 7, flat 9. So there we have a line that goes. And that's the kind of thing you hear when you hear Charlie Parker playing all those kind of those things that connect, you know, those type of lines that connect over fast-moving changes. You hear lots of this kind of stuff. So one of the things to do is build up a vocabulary of ways to get to here. So ways to get there. And then things to do when you're there. So different patterns that go from this point. So I'd explore this 3rd and 7th, or 7th and 3rd connection. It also happens in major as well. So maybe that's tip number 2. Our third one is one way of seeing these chords is where you don't actually see this as a half diminished. So this is an E minor 7 flat 5. But if we look at it, here we have these 3 notes, which is a G minor triad. That's what that is. Okay, so there's a G minor triad. G minor. So we can see it like G minor 6, like those. So there's a G minor with an E underneath it. So G minor 6 we know could be, well, what could it be? It could be G Dorian. All against E. Could be that. It could also be G melodic minor. And that's this beautiful sound with the natural second. So we could sometimes call this Locrian natural 2. That great sound. So that's just by seeing it as a G minor. Or you could do like what the Django boys do a lot of. They see it as a G minor 6. G minor 6 arpeggio. And if you study that, you'll realise it's exactly the same notes. Okay. So we can see this as being a 4 chord. G minor is a 4 chord. So instead of it being a 2 chord, it's a 4 chord. Now, an interesting thing we can do is we can also see the A7 as being the 4 chord as well. Going to D minor. So instead of seeing it as 2, 5, 1, we imagine it like this: 4, 1, 4, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, or minor 6 maybe. And we can play over it accordingly, like G minor, over both E minor 7/5 and the A7 as well. And the reason why this will work against A7 is what we end up with is Phrygian mode against an A chord. We end up with this sound. Well, of course, we have the melodic minor version of this as well, which would give it a natural 6, wouldn't it? That gives it a natural 6. So that's maybe used a little bit more in major, but it would definitely work where if I play G minor, G Dorian, same notes as A Phrygian. Now, probably up to this point, you've been taught the Phrygian is a minor scale. You know, those kind of things, you know, and we learn it because we want to learn that kind of Aldi Meola, Spanish type, flamenco-y type sound. And sure, it is used in that instance, but you know this tune? It does that, yeah, blue bossa, yeah. It doesn't go, which is the traditional kind of way of playing over a dominant chord. It uses a flat 9. It's got a flat 9 in there. That's what that is. Now, if I look at Phrygian mode from the root and I spell the notes, you've got root, minor 2nd, minor 3rd, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7 octave. But it could be root, flat 9, raise 9. That's what it could be. Sus 4, so no 3rd, hasn't got a 3rd. 5, raise 5. Flat 7 octave. So it's got the potential to be played against dominant 7 chords. And very often, if you're playing something that's gone, and you're just playing kind of D natural minor or whatever against that, that's what's happening. D natural minor goes from the key of F. Take that to A. What do you get? A Phrygian. That's what you're getting. So if you see all of this stuff as being some kind of like expression of just the tonic of D minor, you've been playing Phrygian mode against the dominant 7 chord all along. So this idea of repurposing of scales could be something that, again, it's another topic. I mean, the altered scale is a repurpose of scale, because if you look at the spelling of it, it would normally, if you spell like triads and 7th chords the way you would in conventional harmony, you end up with actually half diminished chords because the spelling of the altered scale, I know I'm jumping about a bit here, maybe over the A, is root, flat 2, flat 3, flat 4, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7. So that's really root, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. It's a half diminished chord. But we never use it against that really, because what we think is this flat 4 actually sounds like a major 3rd, and if it sounds like a major 3rd, it kind of is a major 3rd. So that's a repurpose of a scale. That's like me saying, okay, Phrygian mode's got a minor 3rd, but I'm going to hear that as a sharp 9, sharp 2, or a flat 2. So in which case it's plausible. So that means you could play 4 minor, 4 minor, 1 minor. And you can do, that's where these kind of, these streams, you know, bop lines or whatever, where you just think G minor goes to D minor. That's a really cool way of playing against it. Now, of course, what we could do is we could see them as separate things. So I could see this as being G minor 6, that kind of sound. And the reason why minor 6 is cool is because it can go either way. It could become Dorian if you wanted to, and it can become melodic minor if you wanted to as well. Now I could see this chord now. I can see this as like a minor 6 chord, a semitone above, and that's a total like Borelli thing. So you play. So it's minor A altered or A7 gives us B flat minor 6, and then for D minor 6. So we have. So that's an option in terms of arpeggio. That's pretty cool. So what ends up happening here, you've got the same sound 3 times. That opens the door to the next kind of tip, if you like, which is whatever we do over this chord, so whatever can be moved up a minor 3rd and then up a major 3rd. Doesn't matter what it is as well, it could be anything. Doesn't matter what the phrase is at all. You know, you can try this with, you know, lots of different ideas, blues licks even, you know. So this is a concept that many jazz players, you know, Wes and all those guys, and Pat Martino and so what you'll hear a lot, you know, whatever you play over this, and then we play it up on. So whatever you play, you can see it here clearly. There's what key? So I can play. There's an E half diminished. There's an A. 7 raised 5. D minor. So that's the next concept, I guess, is minor 3rd, major 3rd. That works over major as well. We can discuss that on a different day, perhaps. Okay, so where are we up to? So we've gone through arpeggios, the half diminished, diminished connection. We're looking at the idea of seeing it as a 4 to a 1. So you can see it as a 4 chord moving to a 1 chord. That's particularly useful when it's roaring tempo, when things are really fast. We could see it as separate things, of course, a scale for each of those, you know. But it's useful. I mean, I don't know about you, but what have you got in low Korean natural 2? You know, I haven't really got much, if I'm being honest. But G melodic minor, I've got tons of things to say about that, and they're the same thing, you know. And not only they're the same thing, the chord tones match as well. So a cool note in G is a cool note against the E. It works, you know, because the root becomes the minor 3rd. That's the flat 5. That's the flat 7. And they're all the notes you want. So. Okay, so our last thing I was going to look at is another way. If you see this as not as an E half diminished, this is kind of an interesting way of seeing that chord. If I see this as being some kind of a G minor, then that presents us with something we can do with a bar 4, you know. So if we go E half diminished, A7, D minor. Now a lot of times what we end up doing, going B minor 7 flat 5, you know, to create like a, what's that called, a 2-5-1-6 or 1-6-2-5, you know, depending upon which one of those you start on. But really this is the same sound as this. In fact, it's the same notes. There's a D minor 6. Here's a B minor 7 flat 5. It's the same thing. Right? But one of the things we can do is we can imagine that we're not heading back to the E half diminished. It's kind of a weak spot in the harmony. Like if I played a 5 chord to that, it might work. It kind of works, I guess. But what we could do is instead of going E half diminished in our minds, we think it's actually doing this. Our progression is going G minor, A7, D minor, G minor, A7, D minor. Because D is the dominant of G. So we can go G minor, D7 altered. an option. And now that will work as well, even if that D7 chord isn't sounding as a form of tension, which gets released when it resolves. So that's kind of like a sneaky option that you may not be familiar with. So you can perceive it as being 2, 5, 1, there. That kind of thing. So I'm seeing this as being the 5 chord of G minor, you know. Cool. So hopefully you can sort of pick the bones out of that and find something interesting to play, I'm hoping. Yeah, if you've got any more questions, if there's any questions about this kind of stuff, then please just fire away and I'll answer them next week. Unfortunately, my eyesight's terrible, and even though I've got stuff on either side of me and a ticker tape of names coming up, which is lovely, it's great to see everybody here, I can't see them. So what I'll have to do is I'll have a little look through that as the week progresses, and then I can hopefully shape what we do next week based around it. Okay, so I had a really great question from Jacob to do with improvising, which is to do with like sort of how, and I'm going to tie this in with another question that I have from Jack about practice, right? Sort of like how do you maintain, like how does it sound like music, I guess is the thing, and then that leads into how do you practice, or what's the best way to practice. And I'll just, the caveat for this is I'm not claiming to be like a super expert, like as if, you know, my way is the right way and everyone else is wrong or whatever. These are just things that I've tried personally that seem to work, and some things don't work. So the first thing to say about practice is there is no perfect practice plan. It's a bit like, you know, what's the perfect exercise routine, and people could argue about it till the cows come home, you know. But what I will say is doing something is better than nothing. So what we do, we soldier on with an imperfect practice plan. Rather like that, there's that expression about advertising, you know, half of advertising doesn't really hit the mark. Fortunately, they don't know which half. And it's the same thing with practicing, you know, probably percentage of what you do is really effective, and a percentage of it is, you know, treading water or what have you. Usually though, you don't really know, because the revelations that you might have and those kind of eureka moments can happen at any point. Usually when you least expect them, in my experience. So just some things about practice that I find to be really helpful is it's good to have like a purpose in mind. So that's like setting goals, and that could be on a daily basis, and I'm a list maker, as you can probably tell. Or it could be on a more kind of long-term basis, and that's maybe an important thing. So there's two things that just in my experience of I've been playing for 40 something years now, 51 now, and I've been playing since, I can't remember, not put it that way. And other than recently, where I had a 5-week layoff because of 2 weeks at home on the couch and then in hospital for a bit, that's the only time I've not played guitar. I take a little ukulele, which is around here somewhere. I take this on holiday with me, so I'm always playing, doing something. But one of the things the two things that seem to help, along with having a sense of purpose, are making certain that you've got something that you can work on, that you come back to. One of the problems with saying, so traditionally I've done like four things a day is my goal. You know, if I can do that, that's like them saying, you know, eat 5 pieces of fruit or whatever. If I practice 4 different things, that's really cool. But if they're jumping about and leaping about all over the place, sometimes all you're doing is basically maintaining what you've already got, right? And maybe on some occasions that's exactly what you need. But to make any real growth, sort of incremental growth, there needs to be some topics that you come back to. So there's certain things that I've been working on recently that I've come back to for months, you know, working on. There's a great Jonathan Kreisberg thing where he's talking about playing rhythmic groupings that go over the bar line and whatnot. And I've been on that for maybe 2-3 months, you know, because for me, being able to play, say, John Kreisberg's examples, that's not the end. That's like the start of the journey. So it's only when these things come out in my playing that then I feel like as if I've actually got something from a particular way of study, rather than just being able to play some kind of like novelty set piece or whatever to kind of impress people. That's not really growth. Growth is about, for me, is when these things just come out without thinking about them, I guess. And that takes time, and that takes coming back to stuff. So every day I'll have new things that I'll do, or I'll have generally repertoire-based thing. There'll be something based around maintaining what I've already got, and that can zip about all over the place. That could be anything. Could be literally could be anything. But then there's always something, maybe 2 or 3 things, whatever they may be. I had a thing with polyrhythms. I was taking lessons with Peter Eldman, who's a genius, you know, my word. But before that, it was big intervals. That was something I worked on for about 6 months, you know. All these Joe Diorio things. And I kept coming back to it. Maybe not necessarily always daily. It might be, you know, on a cycle of like every couple of days. But by coming back to something, that's where you see the growth, and that's where you see like the things changing over time. And you're also thinking about it when you're not playing the guitar. Subconsciously, you're thinking about these things. And one of the things about improvisation is we're dealing on a subconscious level a lot of the time. The problem with the subconscious is you can't really directly communicate with it. You have to sort of leave mental post-it notes out, I guess. And then what happens is your subconscious figures all that out, probably when you're asleep or when you least expect it, and then hopefully it comes out without thinking about it. But this idea of a sense of purpose, right? So when I practice, generally speaking, I'm practicing something specific. I'm probably very small, right? Usually very small. So thing number 1 is always come back, find something that's a long-term thing, like a thing you want to work on over a period of weeks or months, and come back to that daily. Even if you only got 2 minutes and you come back and just touch it, then you'll get a feeling of progression. And the second one is be a bit selfish with your practice as well. That's something that I do. I'm learning Teen Town at the minute on the bass, you know. Not for a gig or anything like that at all, just because it's fun and I like it. It's good. So it could be you're learning something just because you're into it. It doesn't necessarily have to do with work. I mean, I know some guys that are on here are going to be just like people who play for fun and, you know, for their own enjoyment. And for you, that's everything. But if you're like more like a professional guitar player, which a lot of you guys are, then it can very easily become work, you know, and you kind of go, oh, I've got to go and pick up the guitar and learn a set or learn these tunes or whatever. And you have to be a bit careful there, because that's not why anybody picked up the instrument in the first place. And if it becomes just a job, then the periods between practicing generally get longer, I've found. Or personally, not for me, because I've always found ways of getting around it. But I see friends of mine who are professional players who don't practice. You know, they can do the job, they can play the gig that they're playing. You know, so what are they practicing for? You know, unless you've got like sort of aspirations for doing greater things or being broader or whatever, then what's the point of it? Other than to just keep things well oiled, and that doesn't take that long once you've been playing for a while. Just by the nature of just playing will do that, I would think. So that's what I do. And I use timers, and I underestimate brutally because I want to achieve what I'm doing. So this idea of going, I'm going to practice for like 7 hours every single day, it's not realistic, you know, because I've got to put the bins out, and you know, I've got to make certain that you know, my accounts are done, and I've got answer emails, and I've got to set up Facebook Live. You know, life will get in the way, you know, and really positive things. You know, you want to actually have a life. So I underestimate. I usually do 4. Well, since I'm in lockdown, it's kind of doubled, and because I missed a lot of weeks, I wanted to catch up for time. We usually have 4 half-hour sessions. But they can be any time. One could be first thing in the morning, one could be at break time, and I do it when I'm teaching a lot of an hour break, you know, eating 30 minutes and then play for a bit, and then stick around after work perhaps, or after doing a sound check at a gig or whatever, and then pick up other parts, you know, other sessions, as it were. And it can be, you know, any time, rather than, they're very rarely all together. So that idea of setting goals, and I'd say they're the main areas for me. Repertoire, there's always some tune to learn or what have you. Maintenance of what you've already got. Developing new skills, and that's the thing that generally we keep coming back to. And then some kind of creative endeavour, which could be like, improvising, composition I'm working on at the moment. I'm writing and recording a new album, so I come back to that almost daily. And things like sight reading, ear training, transcribing, you name it. For me, fortunately, a lot of those things get taken care of with work because I do a lot of stuff for guitar magazines. So transcribing and ear training, I'm kind of like getting paid for it. It's a job, but it's a good job, and the person who learns the most is me. But if I feel like I've kind of touched upon those things, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I've missed, but they're all sort of in there in the mix, then I feel like I've kind of like done my duty of not like I'm not slacking. I'm actually doing the work. Is your obligation as a pro musician, I guess. Now, of course, if your aspirations are to just sort of play a few Pink Floyd songs or what have you, which is great, or to be able to play the solo off Hotel California, well, that's a different thing, and there's loads of guys do that and girls do that and have a great time and probably enjoy it a lot more than most professional musicians, because for them it becomes kind of a job and pressure and stress and all this kind of stuff. So I try and like let go of that, and there's usually something in the day that I learn that's got nothing to do with work. It could be completely just for the sake of it, learn some classical pieces just for kicks, learn to play the mandolin. I play a lot of bass, anything, could be anything. So hopefully that might have that might give you some ideas with practicing. I mean, you could do stuff like jot it down what you do, just do it for a week. It'd be like someone who's trying to, I don't know, watch the weight or whatever, writing down everything they eat for a week just to notice, because you might not realise, you might not realise that you're eating at funny times or whatever. Well, likewise, you might get to the end of the week and you've not worked on technique at all, or you've not done anything creative, and that might like raise a red flag that you can then address, and I find that's useful for me. If I think, okay, I haven't written anything for ages, I'll factor it in. I haven't practiced reading music for a long time, I'll make certain that it's in there, and you can't do everything. I mean, and that's, I guess, maybe number 3 is not only do you have to decide what you want to do, it's good to decide what you don't. It's good to decide what you don't. You can't be the best at everything. Not that the objective is to be the best, but you can't do everything. So there's certain styles of guitar playing and certain styles of music that I absolutely love. I adore it. When I hear players who play the percussive style of Declan Zapata and guys like John Gorman and Thomas Lieb and all those guys, it knocks me out, man. It's incredible. It's such a energetic and just fun, and like everybody loves it, and for good reason. But I don't do any of that stuff at all, because I figure if I practiced it for a year, I'd be like terrible at it, whereas there's other stuff that I'm going to use that is more important, that gets used on a day-to-day basis. That's not to say, by the way, that I couldn't include that in there, do something for fun's sake. So, who knows, Deck, at some point I might be learning one of your pieces, but it wouldn't be to perform it. It would be just because it's fun to go to the guitar and go, wow, I learned this thing today. So that idea of having intent, I would say, that's maybe the thing. If you just remember one thing, I'd say have intent. So when you're practicing stuff, have intent. So today I spent 2 hours practicing some stuff for GT recording. Tomorrow there's 5 licks in the style of 5 different blues players. They're kind of quite long licks, 8 bars. Yeah, 8 bars. And then 5 12-bar solos, and I've got to record this tomorrow morning. So it's one thing transcribing it, it's another thing playing it. So today I went through them all and spent like 15 minutes on, or whatever it was, 15 minutes or so on each one, a set timer. And I went through them all, so I can play. Fortunately, I can play them all. I know I can play them all, so the recording should be fun tomorrow. But that was a big part of my practice today, and then I did some other thing earlier on, and I've got another session after this. I'm going to practice something else after this. So hopefully that might help. But the thing Jacob was talking about was, sort of, I guess it boils down to like phrasing, and it boils down to like the difference between music and between craft in music and art. So by this, what I mean, so I'll just give you a whole bunch of stuff to play over minor 251s. So you can learn these things, but they become technical exercises or mechanical, sterile devices. It's not necessarily music. So maybe I'll use the major scale. So we learn the major scale. In this case, in the key of A, and just in one position. or a couple of areas. You might learn different fingerings. Now that's a mechanical thing, is to learn the scale. But what I did there at the end, I made a little, just a subtle adjustment to it to make a melody out. And you can play. You play breezing if you like. So something that I like to practice whenever I do anything that's like a technical thing, like a scale fingering or something like that, is that then I try and make little melodic fragments. So rather than it being just up and down or a pattern, right, I'm thinking about where to resolve. Like, is there a phrase length in mind? So am I thinking about a rhythmic idea? Am I thinking about a certain melodic idea? But trying to get it away from sounding like an exercise. Now, one of the best things you can do, so I'm not deliberately not using any backing here because you should be able to just play this on the guitar. One thing you could do is kind of play some harmony. And then leave yourself some space. At the end then. And then play a phrase in between. That's a musical idea rather than like a pattern. Now, even though there are fragments of patterns, the reason why we learn all this stuff, and there's loads of... I was looking at Jennifer Batten thing in Guitar Techniques this month, and she's talking about this kind of stuff. The patterns in this case, like, well, this is kind of an interesting skipping pattern. Is to try and make even that, try and make that musical. By thinking about where does the phrase end. And one of the reasons why I think guitar players can sort of struggle to make things musical is they don't really know where to stop. We think when we practice lines, we're always thinking about where to begin, but we generally don't think about where to end. It's always about where an idea starts, where it comes from this or that scale or that scale. Whereas it could actually be more to do with like what note you end on, and that's something that we could look at some point. This idea of you can phrase over certain harmony where you're playing completely in the wrong key, but you've got the intention of ending on a specific note when the harmony changes to the sound that you've already been playing. So that's something I could demonstrate with backing. So you're playing over A major for a bar, and then A minor for a bar, but you go A major, A minor now, and then A major now, so it'd be 3 or what have you, whatever you want. So that's about where phrases resolve. So this idea of intention and trying to kind of mimic what you might hear. So what might somebody play on any other instrument, so that we're not just dealing with guitar, what we're dealing with is music. So this is where singing what you play, I think, is a really good idea. It's a two-way street though, this concept of like being able to hear what you play. Sometimes you need to play it first to get it into your ear. So you might learn a new sound, major 7 sharp 5 or something like that, and you learn it arpeggio. Now I don't know about you, but I couldn't just automatically hear that before I played it. So before I played it, at first it was a fingering, Now it becomes. this kind of sound, or anything else, you know, whole tone scale. Those kind of like augmented ideas. You're hearing Django's playing, you know. I had to play that, you know, thousands of times before I could actually even begin to imagine what it sounded like without the guitar. So this is something that starts, I think, slow and starts small. So you might even take something as simple as one note. And if you can't really hear what that sounds like, and then we go, and then I had a third. So I don't need the guitar to know that that's going to be. Then we go and extend. So by starting with just being able to hear what one note sounds like, you know, if you can't hear and imagine what an A to a B sounds like, then forget about anything else. Like, just don't go anywhere else. So again, tying back into the practice thing, this stuff could be incremental. So there's definitely, it's like playing a video game, like you can't skip a level, there's no cheats for this. If you can't hear boom ba boom boom boom, there's no way you're going to be able to hear something that's more complex than that with a load of chromaticism around it. So you have to make certain that that's okay. And then what happens is the next time you come back to it, you go, given that I've got this, then I can expand it into this. And this is the beauty of coming back to a subject over a period of time, because you see, I could do this, now I can make it into this, and it can expand. So rather than every time you practice it's something new, the problem is that's like there's no support. Everything is just standing there, you know, kind of not leaning against anything else, and it's going to break in the wind. Whereas if you can lean things against one another, then you can also begin to make connections where it's like the language thing. If you were going to learn a new language, the first thing you should be asking, I guess, is not, okay, what don't I know? It should be, what do I know? You know, what works if English is your first language? How many of these words are the same in English? You know? So if you're learning a new subject on guitar, it's very rare that it's going to be completely new. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that you already know, but you might have learnt it in a different way or apply it in a different way. So if you're looking at getting into jazz and you've been playing the blues, well, the good news is you're already kind of 50% there, you know. If you're looking at learning how to play Gypsy Jazz, which is another question, why Gypsy Jazz? Well, you know, if you know the basic chord forms and you can move bar shapes around, and you know how to deliver a melody, if you can play some Shadows tunes, you're there, man. It's like you just need to learn a different accent, shall we say. So so I'm hoping that might be of some help. So I did have a question about that Gypsy Jazz. Martin asks me about why Gypsy Jazz. Okay, let's go back to the goals thing again. So something that's really, really good to keep you motivated is having a reason for doing something. Right? And what got me into playing Gypsy Jazz, I was playing in rock bands, and I still love playing rock music. It's amazing. But there wasn't as much opportunity that I could find to jam regularly. It was just bands rehearsing their own material. Or playing outside of the band, you know, you generally play with the people that you're in the band with, and that was it. But I found with the jazz world, there was the opportunity to learn a tune on Wednesday and then go and sit in at the local jazz jam on Sunday night, you know, and actually try these things out. And myself and my friend Wayne used to get together in an old place that I used to teach guitar. When I finished teaching, he'd come around and we'd just learn tunes and play them. And the guitar jazz tends to gravitate heavily towards Gypsy Jazz for obvious reasons, you know. Although by no means that's not all that I play, you know. But then there was also the opportunity to play with local players, and Gary Potter was always a hero around my neck of the woods, and I'm sure many of you guys have heard of him. He's incredible. And he heard me play somehow. I can't remember. I think somebody else heard me play and suggested to Gary we should get together. And we'd go around to a friend of ours' house, Steve Cronin. We'd go around to his house and sit in the back garden and just play tunes. And it was a completely different thing to playing in a band where you play the same 16 songs round and round, you know. And that was great too. But, you know, the Wednesday afternoon, you know, over a cup of tea, you know, getting roasted on minor swing was a real learning curve for me. And then I realised there's an entire kind of community with a real social thing, where you learn the tunes, you turn up. There's a place, the Junction in Rainford, that has a thing in Liverpool, and then there's obviously places like the Cucumber in Battersea, you know, where they have jam nights and people can turn up. And almost at every level as well, you know, some people play the chords, some people can play the melodies, some guys can burn Stockel or Rosenberg licks over them, but it doesn't really matter. Everyone's accepted and everyone's welcomed, you know. So I got kind of thrown into that and went to San Juan, started playing in this style, and then realised hopefully I've got something to offer in this style, which is to not really play like a gypsy jazz player, because I think there's plenty of them. There's millions of them, you know. There's a whole dynasty of Rosenbergs that are just unbelievable, and every time you look there's another one, you know, that's absolutely out of this world. So I kind of try and offer to it my own thing, which is sort of modern influences, and I throw a few other kind of curveballs at it. And the interesting thing is the gypsy guys seem to really respond to it, because I might do some things that wouldn't ordinarily be played in that style. Of course, you're always going to get some, like, shall we say, purists who maybe don't care for that, but you know, the world's big enough. You know, you can have Fappy in your iTunes, and you can have Adrian Moyard right next to one another, and they're as far removed as you could imagine in terms of approach. So I think I'd probably sit more towards that end. But it's such a great scene, and I'd advise you to check it out. And if you feel like getting involved, just learn a few tunes, you know. And to go back to the thing about practice, me doing those things really polarised or focused my practice, because you'd learn a tune because you were going to play it in the jam session next week, or you were going to sit in and I got invited by Johnny Mack and Les Bolger and those guys, and you know, let me kind of murder standards, you know, for the first couple of years, and then over a period of time you get better and you start to develop some vocabulary and things that you're going to try out, and then it becomes something that you just hear, you know. But that's over the course of many years, I guess. But that's why Gypsy Jazz. That was the reason for that. So there's just a couple of other points. Just I'm aware of time is marching on. One of them is to do with the idea of, like, when you consider harmony. So Petros sent me this question to do with harmony. Like, do you see things as they relate to the major scale, or do you see stuff like kind of like from a modal perspective? What I tend to see harmony, I call this like nested sequences, which is, it's not a universal expression, it's just something that I use, which means that particularly in jazz harmony, then you've got stuff, you can have functional progressions within a progression. Okay, so if you take a progression like a 2-5-1, right, like that's like a D minor, so this time I'll do major, G7, C major, or C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B major. That can kind of function by itself and can be moved around within a progression. So like a tune like Giant Steps, you know, which is in B to begin with, it actually kind of resolves to G, but it starts on B, and then goes to a D7, and then goes to a G. So it doesn't make really any sense for me to think that's the one chord. Well, is it the one chord? It actually isn't. Actually, the G's the one chord. But we often think first chord in a progression is B, that's where we're coming from. So then it's like flat 3 and then flat 6. It's a mess. It doesn't make any sense, you know? So what we have to do is see nested progressions, meaning this is in B, then this is now in G. Now we can think of the relationship between them, the minor, major third apart. And then now we play B flat 7, that's in the key of E flat. And then we have a 2-5-1 in G. So now we're in G. Now we're in E flat. And now we're back into B again. And so on, and on it goes. And lots of jazz tunes have that kind of thing happening, where the whole progression might be coming from a variety of different places. So what I mean by like nested is, so say we take something like Cherokee, and so on. So imagine we've done that, you know, we've done the first part. So it's a B flat. Then it goes to, so it's changing key. So even though we're in the key of B flat to begin with, what happens is it then goes to the key of B. So to think of that as, what would that even be? Like like flat 3 minor, flat 6 dominant, flat 2 major. Doesn't make any sense. I just think of it as an actual specific functional key change, but related to where it sits in relation to the overall harmony. So in this case, that's the 1, and this is a 2-5-1, a semitone higher than the root, and then we have a 2-5-1. It's a semitone higher than the root, but it starts on the 2, of course. Then we have a 2-5-1, a semitone lower than original key. Then tone it below again, and then we're kind of like on our way home now, and then we're back to where we started from. So rather than thinking of things like everything relating to the major scale, every number 1 to 8 or 1 through 7, and then variations of it, you can think of these nested progressions where it changes key. So this also works when it's within key. So if you play a tune like Autumn Leaves, so say for example, we'll do it in G major, E minor. Well, there's a good case in point. When people talk about Autumn Leaves, they say, is it G major, is it E minor? It's kind of both, isn't it? Because it's 2, 5. So this is G major. So we're 2, functionally 2, 5, 1, 4. Now 7, 3 is a dominant, 6 minor. Really? I'm not really thinking of it that way. I'm thinking 2, 5, 1, connection chord, 2, 5, 1 in E minor. So that's the way I would think of that. I wouldn't think of this as being like we're still in G. Because if I did that, then there's a tendency that if you think G, then you're going to play things that relate to G. So I tend to see stuff as being like borrowed from other keys. And that could even be the case with something that's kind of like a borrowed chord. So if, take a tune like Little Wing or whatever, the chord of F that's sort of borrowed from another key. Because everything else is coming like from G major, and then the chord of F implies like a G7 type sound. So, and the reason why this is useful, particularly things like modal chord progressions. So of course, if you were playing like over an A minor groove, I think of that, of course it could be the 2 chord in the key of G, but it's probably better to think of it as the 1 chord in a whole new scale. Right. So what this does is, it's a little bit more work. Right. So again, this raises the question of, do you think of this as a G scale from A? Or do you think of this as a whole new scale from A? And I would say it's more work, but to think of it as a whole new scale from A is much better, rather than you're imagining G. Because if you're imagining G, even something as simple as what I just did there would be a real nightmare. Because what I did is I went from playing A Dorian, the scale from A, and then I played A blues scale, all A things from A. Whereas if I'm thinking of this as G major, to go from G major to A blues scale is not an easy transition. It's from a kind of psychological perspective, it feels like it's a lot more different than it might be. You don't see the shared tones. Or if you're playing over an A7, to think, oh, that's D major. Well, in that case, how are you going to hear all that sassy A blues stuff, like... if you're thinking of it as a D major scale. And then consequently, that means that the harmony will go with that as well. So even though this is the 5 chord in D, if it's an A7, I'm not thinking, I wouldn't think of this as being 5-4, 5-4. It's 1, flat 7, 1, flat 7. So the harmony relates more to its function against the root at that period of time, because of course in 4 bars we may go someplace else, and in music like jazz that's going to happen. There are really more than two types of modulation, but the 2 principal ones are where we temporarily use a sound from another source, and that might happen for 1 chord or 2 beats or what have you. And then there's the true modulation when we move to a complete new key. Now sometimes it might stay there, and other times it might move through a cycle of keys and come back to where you started. And that's, all of those things are present, but that one where it comes back to where you started is more kind of relevant in jazz. So I'm hoping that may have answered more questions than raised, but we shall see. If anything, doesn't make any sense, then just drop me a line and I'll maybe cover it. We'll do this again next week. Yeah, if you've not understood anything, if something's not made sense, don't worry, it's not you, it's probably the way that I've explained it. Or, conversely, like what it might be, like all of these things, as I say, you can't skip levels, it's not possible, right? So if something's not making sense, it's most likely either I've explained it poorly, or secondly, the supporting things that you need are not in place. So for example, it's pointless me saying, well, let's harmonise the Dorian mode in 4-note chords, if you've no idea what that is, you know. Or if I'm talking about, oh, this is a 2-5-1 and the first chords are half diminished, if you don't know what a minor scale is. So there's things that you have to put in place first. So sometimes with learning, I've experienced that you, by reaching forward for something, you have to kind of go back and figure out what are the things that you need before you can even jump in here. So I don't think there's any possibility to skip levels, because it always comes back to sort of you know, to haunt you later on when you realise the foundations are in place and things tumble. So yeah, I'm hoping that that's been some food for thought for everyone. Thank you so much. I can see messages and names flying by, but unfortunately I can't see them. So what I'll do is I'm going to go through those in a little while, and then that'll hopefully create a plan for next week. There's one other question actually that I was going to touch on. Harrison was asking about music journalism. I write stuff for guitar magazines. I guess the thing to do there and the way to get into that, I mean, it's difficult for me to say, because I was kind of, like most of these things are in music, I was recommended for a job for a Guitar Techniques via Sean Baxter. Sean very kindly put me up for something. I think it was about The Darkness, if I remember right, when they just came out. That's how long ago it was. And they basically auditioned me on the job. You know, they give you a commission, or gave me a commission, and we had to see how I got on with it. And then the second one was Cream, right? And I knew that was a real test, because the editor, Neville Martin, he's an amazing guitar player, but he plays that style so well. And I thought, okay, if anyone's going to know if this is kind of if this is off, he's the man to know. You know, like if I do stuff and it's not stylistically appropriate, or even down to the sound, you know, you're not using the right sound, he's going to know. So I would say the things that you've got to develop for that kind of work are a real attention for detail. You've got to be just unbelievably anal with it. I mean, I transcribed Jeff Beck for this blues thing that I've just done, and I was on one bar for an hour, you know, because he doesn't play two notes without scooping in or diving away or sliding in or gargling a trem or something. Part of me was thinking, God blimey, give me like Pat Metheny any day, or Pat Martino or someone like that who just plays notes one after the other. These blues guys, they never play three notes without doing something, which means you've got to reflect that in the transcription, and they're floating all over the beat and so on. But I'm aware of the fact that it needs to be right, so it's painstaking. So detail and accuracy are two super important things. And also understanding like the bigger picture. Sometimes, like if you're doing something that's in the style of, then you really need to kind of understand what they might do, which means listening beyond what you present. So me doing BB King, say, this month, you know, I've listened to hours of BB King. In fact, usually what I do when I used to do like style things rather than artist-based things rather than just general stuff, is just drive around in the car, listening to like 3 or 4 albums by that particular artist for like 3 weeks, you know, just to kind of get where they're at, you know, what makes them unique, you know, and so try and focus in on those things. And that's why I'm usually late with coffee every week. Fortunately now I've done enough of them that very often the same artists come around, you know, BB King and Eric Clapton and so on. So I've got a kind of a repository of things that they might do. And that's not so that you can go on stage and try and mimic Eric Clapton. I don't know if that's even any useful. But what happens is all these things that you learn leave a trace, and they certainly leave a trace in my playing. So I've maintained that the person who learns the most out of all of these things has been me. Because for me to transcribe 12 bars of Clapton, I've listened to like 12 hours of his music, you know, and that has an impact and that makes a difference. So my advice to you is really get stuck into working on transcribing. I'm sure there's like, I mean, I guess these things, there's a lot of online opportunities, you know, but present your work, you know, build up a body of work. It's like being an artist. You have to have a what do they call it, like a portfolio, or a, you know, like a kind of a like examples of what you can do, and then you can use them in other ways, and they're the kind of thing that you could use to kind of prove to someone that you're capable of doing that job, and then you take it from there, I guess. So I'm hoping there's some areas there of interest. Apologies if it's gone off on a jazzy tangent for too long, and all there's things there that you didn't really understand, but I'm hoping that you've stuck with me. Thank you so much for your attention. Thanks once again from the bottom of my heart for everyone who sent me such kind and supportive messages. I'm really sorry to scare everyone. I'm aware of the fact that it was a scary time for everyone, you know, and I felt the love, and I really appreciate it. You know, both myself and Kathy, I think, were touched by the expressions of goodwill and just positive, you know, selfless acts of kindness. It's very, very encouraging, and it's kind of restored my faith in humanity, just to see how everyone's pulling together. So stay safe, everybody, stay safe. Look after each other. Try not to let lockdown drive you crazy. Keep practicing. And I'll see you next week. Keep the questions coming in. I'm sorry if anyone sent stuff. I know, Jordan, you sent me something before, and I've not touched upon it. I promise that I'll try and put these into some semblance of order, and I will get around to it, so stick with me. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.